Case open. Copenhagen, early 1990s. A chemist named Lotte Biera Knudsen walks into her lab and half the benches are empty. The project she believes in is being quietly shut down around her. The thing she's chasing, a gut hormone called GLP-1, keeps falling apart inside the human body in minutes, useless as a drug. Everyone with a budget has already moved on. She's been told, more or less politely, to let it go. One of her own collaborators would later admit it out loud. The only reason the work didn't die right there was that Lotte refused to stop being excited about it. Years later, asked how she kept picking fights nobody wanted her to pick, she just said she was born brave. Her colleagues thought she was stubborn about a dead end. She thought they were about to walk away from the answer to a question nobody was even asking the right way. Why do we eat when we're not hungry? And why can't we stop when we are? Hold on to that question, and hold on to Lotte, alone in that emptying lab, because the molecule she wouldn't let die would go on to do something to 1 billion bodies that willpower never could, and crack open the thing people have spent their whole lives blaming themselves for when it was never theirs to blame. But something in her story doesn't add up yet. Because Lotte eventually won. She fixed the molecule. She got it to survive in the body, first as a diabetes drug in 2010, then as the blockbuster the whole world now knows. Millions of people with type 2 diabetes started taking a GLP-1 drug every week. And here's the part that kept me up. For years, those patients barely lost any weight. Sit with that. If this one hormone is supposedly the master switch for hunger, why wasn't it melting the pounds off the exact people who were already injecting it? Either the hunger story was wrong, or something about how they were taking it was wrong. That gap, that's the whole case. And Lotte, stubborn as ever, wouldn't let it go. She started pushing inside her own company to chase weight loss on purpose, arguing past her own bosses, past the safe money that said stay in the diabetes lane, past every reasonable person telling her obesity wasn't a real drug market. She kept arguing, and the answer she was circling was hiding in a number everyone else was reading too politely. So let's do what she did. Let's open the hormone up and see what it actually does. Deep in the lining of your gut sit little sensors called L cells. You eat, they fire, and they release that hormone, GLP-1, into your blood. Now, the easiest way to picture what it does next is a volume dial on a radio. GLP-1 is the hand on the dial for hunger. When the hormone is high, it turns the hunger signal down. The station goes quiet, you feel full, you push the plate away without a fight. When it's low, the dial cranks up, and hunger isn't a polite suggestion anymore. It's a station blasting at full volume that you cannot turn off by wanting it quieter. Here's the uncomfortable twist. People who struggle with their weight often release less GLP-1, or their brain barely listens to the GLP-1 they do make, which means their dial was already cranked up loud before they sat down for breakfast, while the naturally lean person across the table, feeling smug about their discipline, was living with the dial turned gently down the whole time. Same restaurant, two completely different radios. One person white-knuckling a scream, the other calmly not hungry, both convinced the difference was character. So it was never a willpower gap. It was a miscalibrated dial, and nobody handed anyone the manual. But that just sharpens the mystery, doesn't it? If everybody has this dial and the drug turns it, why did those early diabetes patients barely budge on the scale? Lotte's team had a suspicion, and it circles right back to that emptying lab 30 years earlier. Remember, the original hormone fell apart in the body in minutes. The first drugs were better than that, but not by enough. They were gentle, and they faded fast. It was like nudging that stubborn volume dial with one finger for a few seconds a day and expecting the whole room to go quiet. The hand wasn't strong enough, and it wasn't on the dial long enough. So they built something that was. Semaglutide, the molecule you now know by its brand names, was engineered to last a whole week from a single shot and to press on that dial far harder, all the way up into the brain's hunger centers. Then they ran the real test, a dedicated weight loss trial, semaglutide against a placebo, both groups getting the same tired diet and exercise advice that had been failing people for 60 years. The semaglutide group lost about 15% of their body weight over 68 weeks. 15%. To feel that number, line it up against the best behavioral weight loss programs ever run, the ones with coaches, calorie tracking, weekly check-ins. Their gold standard result is around 3 to 5% that stays off. This tripled it, and it did it not by making anyone more disciplined, but by turning a dial their body had jammed. But the number wasn't even the strangest thing in that trial. People started reporting something they didn't have words for at first. The food noise was gone. That constant background hum. What am I going to eat? When? Should I? Can I stop? The mental radio that never fully switches off. For people who'd fought their weight their whole lives, that noise was just what having a mind felt like. They assumed everyone lived with it. Then one woman in a trial described sitting in her kitchen at night and realizing, for the first time she could remember, that the room was quiet. No argument, no pull toward the fridge, nothing. When the drug turned it off, some of them cried. Not about the weight, about the silence. The sudden proof that the voice they'd been fighting for decades was never their personality. It was a hormone. There's your answer to the first question. We eat when we're not hungry, because for some of us, the dial is broadcasting hunger that has nothing to do with an empty stomach. And I'll be honest, at this point in the investigation, I figured the case was basically closed. Stronger dial, quieter hunger. Done. I was wrong, because someone looked at that 15% and asked a dangerous question. What if hunger isn't the only dial in the room? It isn't. Your gut doesn't run on one hormone. It runs on a small panel of them working together. GLP-1 is the loud one, but there are two others sitting right beside it that also shape how you store fat and how much energy you burn just sitting still. Semaglutide only had a hand on one dial, so a rival lab asked, what if you grabbed all three at once? That drug is called retatrutide, and when its trial results landed in 2023, researchers had to read them twice. The highest dose took off about 24% of body weight in under a year. 24%. That is the territory of bariatric surgery, physically rebuilding someone's stomach and intestines on an operating table, reached instead by a weekly injection that just talks to the body in its own hormonal language. Same result, no scalpel, and buried in that trial was the piece that reframes everything before it. People on the 3-dial drug weren't only eating less, they were burning more, even at rest, which forced everyone to finally say the quiet part out loud. Your body has a thermostat for weight. Think of a heated room in winter. Set the thermostat to a temperature and the system defends it. You crack a window, the heater roars louder to compensate. Your body does exactly this with a weight it has decided is safe. Diet through pure willpower, and your body notices the windows open. Hunger hormones climb. Your metabolism quietly turns down. Food starts looking better than it has any right to. You are not imagining the fight. You are arguing with a thermostat that was built over millions of years to win. And now the mystery from the beginning finally closes. Those diabetes patients barely lost weight because their gentle, short-lived doses were a finger tapping the thermostat. Never enough to actually change the setting. Semaglutide pressed harder. Retatrutide grabbed the whole panel. The drugs don't outmuscle the thermostat with more effort. They reach in and change the number it's defending. That is the difference willpower could never make, because willpower was always just you shivering by the open window, insisting you weren't cold, which puts a knife in one of the cruelest experiments in medicine, even though nobody meant it as cruelty. It was a study called Look Ahead. More than 5,000 people with diabetes and obesity, given the most intensive lifestyle program the field could build, followed for about a decade. Meal plans, coaching, group support, the works. First year, they lost close to 9%. Then, still showing up, still doing everything they were told, they watched it climb back to 4 or 5. Not after they quit, while they were still in the program. The data politely called it weight regain. The people living it called it failure and carried it home as a verdict on who they were. But their own investigators knew the regain was coming. It was predicted. It was a thermostat doing its job on schedule. The program wasn't failing the biology. The biology was overruling the program, exactly as designed. Now multiply that one bad night by 1 billion people, all told the same story, that their body was a character flaw they hadn't tried hard enough to fix. Lotte spent 30 years in that emptying lab, picking fights she was told not to pick, chasing the molecule that would prove the story had it backwards. The bravery she was born with, it turns out, was mostly the refusal to accept that 1 billion people were simply weak. So, let me be clear about what this case does and does not prove, because this is a case file, not a prescription. These drugs are not magic, and retatrutide is still in trials, not on a shelf. They carry side effects, real costs, and questions about who can even get them that we're only starting to argue about. Willpower isn't a myth either. It's real. It just isn't built to override an emergency signal running in your body 24 hours a day. Asking it to is like asking someone to sit through a blaring concert by concentrating harder on the silence. Case closed. 3 things this investigation nailed down: hunger, cravings, and the body's stubborn defense of its own weight aren't your personality. They're hormonal signals, dialed up or down by biology you never chose. Semaglutide proved that fixing the signal beats discipline that a body is fighting. And retatrutide proved you can reach the thermostat itself. So if you've ever called yourself weak for a diet that fell apart, hear the verdict. You weren't losing a battle of character. You were arguing with a thermostat, unarmed in the dark. And now, finally, somebody turned on the light. If this cracked something open for you, send it to the person in your life who spent years calling themselves weak for the exact same thing. They deserve to hear it too. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next case is already open, and you don't want to start it without me.